Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Rabid Dog House, where we like to discuss lost or forgotten horror gems with a little bit of bite. I'm your host, Justin Steele, and tonight we are going to discuss 1995's Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation, alongside an overall discussion of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. Directed by Kim Henkel, Next Generation stars Renee Zellweger, Matthew McConaughey, Robert Jacks, Toni Perensky, Lisa Marie Newmyer, and Tyler Cohn. Played by Zellweger, Jenny is a no-nonsense teen preparing for a night out at a high school dance. When she and three of her classmates end up in a car wreck, the disillusioned Jenny cannot begin to imagine the night of terror ahead of her. She comes face to face with the infamous Leatherface, his twisted family, and his deadly chainsaw. Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation is at the heart of the franchise. Tobe Hooper's revered 1973 film is a terrifying experience that kicked off the franchise. Each subsequent entry danced between maniacal horror, intense terror, and macabre comedy. Next Generation's sequential placement is fitting, as it exemplifies all these various elements in one film. Also joining me tonight is my fabulous co-host, Zena Dixon. Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining us for another episode of the Rabid Dog House, where we like to discuss lost and forgotten horror gems with a little bit of bite. Thank you, my fabulous co-host, Zena Dixon, the real queen of horror, for joining me tonight. How are you doing, Zena?
I'm doing great, Justin. How are you?
Good. I'm doing very well, very, very well. Thrilled to have this conversation tonight about Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise overall as a whole. Jumping right in, I can't remember the first time I saw this one, but I mean, I had to have been a teenager. I definitely saw it after the original and part two. It's possible I saw the Next Generation before I saw part three, but definitely
Okay.
before the remakes and all that. And I've always loved it right from the beginning. If this one gets a lot of notoriety for having both, Renee Zellweger and Matthew McConaughey in it.
Mhm.
And I think that's super cool. But I think like I was that age. I mean, this came out in 95, released 96, 97. I was that age when Jerry Maguire came out. Dazed and Confused had been out. A Time to Kill. So I knew who both these character actors were. So to see them in this movie, it wasn't shocking for me. I didn't have that presence of mind yet. I was, 14, 15-ish. But I definitely enjoyed their performances. I think the first Texas Chainsaw I ever saw was part two. I was probably
Okay.
about, 7 or 8 by accident seeing this movie. I was at a friend's house. We were about to go to the circus, and her family
Oh.
and all that were getting ready. And I was downstairs, and I guess her older brother had left this on. And I was just sitting there watching the last 40 minutes of that movie, like, what am I watching? Like, what is this? And I mean, at the time it terrified me, but I was like enthralled. And then I was probably about 15 or so when I finally saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original, the revered, beloved. I was terrified watching it. I thought it was
Oh.
just the scariest thing I ever saw. But Tobe Hooper, and we'll get into this, but Tobe Hooper, the first one, it has that low budget feel, it has that craziness, and that terror, but it also he had wanted more of the macabre sort of humor, dark humor, if you will, to come through, which is why when he did the second one, he really elevated that.
Mhm.
That became to the forefront. And I think a lot of people, and again, this is also something I know we're going to discuss with like the new Texas Chainsaw that came out. I think a
Mhm.
lot of people, going into it don't know what to expect, but I feel like that kind of craziness has always been a part of the series. And I really think that Texas Chainsaw Next Generation is sort of like, love it or hate it or whatever people feel about it. I feel like it maybe best encapsulates the spirit of the
Mhm.
franchise as a whole. Obviously the first one kicked it off, but looking at the franchise and where it went with like the serious tones of the remakes, or the sort of laugh out loud, can't believe you're laughing out loud moments of part two, or the
Mhm.
bizarreness of part three. I feel like Next Generation takes all of those elements, sort of gives the audience it all. And I'm sure, I know a lot of people have a lot of adverse reactions to this one. There's a lot of craziness in it too, but I think it also has those scares. It has that craziness. It has some out there stuff that leaves you like, WTF, what is going on? But it also is sort of like a teen movie. And I think in a lot of ways is a really nice precursor to Scream that became this sort of postmodern conversation about horror movies overall. I feel like Next Generation is sort of that same thing, but instead of for horror movies all overall, it's for the Texas Chainsaw franchise. So those are my initial thoughts. As usual, we'll do our non-spoiler review, then we'll jump into spoilers. But Zena, tell me, please, how did you first come into Texas Chainsaw Massacre Next Generation, and what do you think about it? What do you love about it or hate
Okay,
about
but
it?
first, did you have fun at the circus when you were a kid?
Honestly, I think the circus probably, if I remember correctly, kind of paled in comparison to what I had watched downstairs in the basement. But yes, I did have a great time. I think it's
Okay.
really the only time I've ever been to the circus, and it was a wonderful experience. It really was.
Oh,
But I definitely,
okay.
the whole night, this had definitely been in the back of my mind, like, what did I just watch?
Okay, no, cool. I needed to know. Yeah, I watched this one at an extremely young age. I think I was maybe 8 or 9 when I first checked it out. And I remember watching the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like the first one, the original one, as a kid. Maybe I was like 5 or 6, And yes, it scarred me, but I could not get enough because, I was used to like Friday the 13th, like those kind of setups. But it's like, I really don't feel like those kids did anything wrong. They were just on a road, like driving along, having a nice time. And they got a little bit too nosy, just a little bit, but it's fine. But this one though, I remember perfectly. Like I said, I was between 8 or 9 years old, but I watched it with my mom and one of my sisters. And we had such a blast. It was on a Friday night because I remember I could not wait to come home from school because I knew that we were watching it and I was thinking about it all day long. This movie to me is just such a blast. It is ridiculous. It is over the top. The acting is just like, whoa, like some of the lines. I just love it. I think if you're someone who watched like the franchise, it fits in perfectly. You know what I mean? It fits in perfectly. It makes me laugh. There's some stuff where it's just kind of like, it'll make you kind of cringe, but no, it's not scary. And I recommend, if you are watching this and you haven't seen it, even though Justin said there's gonna be spoilers, but this isn't a spoiler. If you haven't seen it, I recommend going in with an open mind and just know that you're gonna have fun. It does not take itself seriously. With the one that just came out from 2022 this year, like you said, I feel like, similar to you, I feel like it fits in with the franchise, perfectly. I had fun with it. It made me laugh. There was some parts that I don't know if it was supposed to be funny, but I still laughed. And it's just like, we finally, in all of the Texas Chainsaw movies, we finally have a scene where it's an actual massacre. We finally get a massacre. So how can you not like this movie? It has blood and guts. It's fast paced. It throws you right in. Within like the first, 20 minutes, even less than, someone is dead. So it's just like, it's entertaining. So.
Well, and I think that's a perfect word, is that the Texas Chainsaw Massacres, what are different from them as opposed to Halloween or Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street, all the other of its generation films. And not to say they're not entertaining, but Texas Chainsaw Massacre at its core, the franchise as a whole, is the entertaining franchise. You go in to be entertained. You're not necessarily going in to have this sort of cathartic experience. You're not going into like, it's not elevated horror. It's just meant to be entertainment and based on loosely the Ed Gein sort of concept, but like overall, it's supposed to make you think, but not like make you think academically, like make you think like, what did I just watch? And it is. And I think the new one too sort of encapsulates that as well. I think it in a way that's similar to Next Generation, that it's also trying to represent the franchise as a whole, where it has some of the serious quality of like the remakes, but also that craziness of the rest of the franchise. And I think that's what makes people come back to this one over and over again, because you are sitting there like watching families that are eating their victims with bone chairs and lampshades made of human skin. I mean, that's disturbing, but we're sitting there watching it. And that's different than you know, you watch Halloween for the like the look and the
Mm-hmm.
suspense, the Friday the 13th for the, you know, nonstop vigorous chase sequences, Nightmare on Elm Street for the visual, like in the nightmare Freddy Krueger. They're all different, but that's what's Texas Chainsaw Massacres. So
Right.
anyway, from here on out, then let's jump into our spoiler reviews. If you haven't seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre Next Generation, go watch it and then come back and watch the rest of this episode. But let's just jump into it. I think one of the things I love right off the bat, this one I have watched with, like, I remember being in college and pulling out my old VHS of it and then DVD of it and watching it with friends and just having a good time. I'll leave it at
Mm-hmm.
that, we did, but we would just crack up laughing throughout the whole thing. Right from the beginning, Heather is one of my all-time favorite characters in a horror franchise. And Heather as well as Darla, I am
Mm-hmm.
like mindlessly entertained by them. And I love that it really is sort of every teen cliche right off the
Mm-hmm.
bat. Every horror cliche right off the bat within the first 5 minutes. You have Barry and Sean, the two best friends as kids who grew apart and now are thrown back together. You have Heather, the sort of valley girl ditz, but she's actually got a lot of intelligence underneath. Or
Mm-hmm.
Jenny, the sort of nerdy girl next door who all she had to do was take off her glasses to be knockout gorgeous. I mean, right away, all of these elements are there. And it's funny because the actors play it straight, but also as if they're in on the joke. They know the film they're making. And then right from the beginning, there's these such seemingly random moments that they seem random, but when you watch it again, you're sort of like, maybe this is a little bit more clever than I thought it was. Like, you know, I would argue that, you know, along with Wes Craven's New Nightmare and Fear from, you know, the Reese Witherspoon
Mm-hmm.
Fear, they they both were the bridges to the next Scream generation
Right.
alongside Texas Chainsaw Massacre Next Generation. I feel like those three movies, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, Fear, and this one, led the bridge to what was going to come in the late 90s. And I mean that
Mm-hmm.
by like, Fear had that 90s thriller hip aspect, while New Nightmare had that meta, blurred lines sort of feel to it, where you're like kind of in this meta commentary. And then, like I said earlier, though, I feel like Texas Chainsaw Massacre Next Generation also has that post commentary feel, like the characters are in on the joke, but it's more just they're in on the joke that they're in a Texas Chainsaw movie. For instance, there's
Mm-hmm.
a scene where Barry's like, they just they're about to get in that car wreck and they're driving down this road, and he just randomly says something like, oh, there's nowhere to turn around. There's never anywhere to turn around. And in that moment, I kind of always laughed awkwardly. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Do you get in this situation a lot that there's like never
Right.
anywhere to turn around down these back roads? But I really think that's written in a way to be like, no, in these movies, there's
Mm-hmm.
never anywhere to turn around. You're going to hit a dead end. Your car's going to be stuck. You're going to run out of gas. You're going to be secluded, and Leatherface is going to cut you. So I feel like there really is this sort of brilliance. Maybe it's
Mm-hmm.
accidental, but I like to believe that it's accidental that they figured it out and made it into this brilliant kind of movie that it is. And that being said, it's not being heavy-handed with these sort of ideas and stuff because they really are just funny and you feel
Right.
included with it. But I guess, what do you think about that in terms of, do you think it's kind of that sort of postmodern feel or related to maybe the Scream generation, or do you think it's just, hey, I am what I am, this is nothing like trying to be any more than entertainment?
I agree with you. I actually think that it's kind of like it was around that time. I forgot that, it was around that time when Scream came out. This was before the faculty, a little bit before the faculty, but around that type of era.
Right.
And I do think at the same time it was trying to be something like everything else, but also just remaining itself, because it's just kind of like you said, they're driving down this road, there's all these signs, nothing makes sense. Okay, Heather catches her boyfriend cheating on her,
Right.
and so then she hops in and she's like driving around the parking lot. But then you know what, Jenny and Sean and Jenny, they're in the back seat, and Barry, for some reason, he hops in the car, and it's just like, why would you get in there? So there's that. Then Heather, like you said, I know that she's not, dumb, even though she's acting that way. It's just her voice makes me laugh.
Right,
And when
right.
she was
It
saying about
does.
her mother, and she was like, "Oh, there might be a killer," and he said, "Oh, that's dumb." Well, don't call me stupid. No one called you stupid. He just said that the idea of that is dumb, And she's like, "Well, it's better than being boring." Okay, you literally almost crashed the car. Look what you did. You crashed the car. They're in the middle of nowhere. But what I don't understand is why didn't they just walk in the direction that they came from? That's something that I never really understood. And then on top of that, why would you just keep driving and you have no idea where you're going? Because of this movie, because obviously I was a kid, I wasn't driving, but because of this movie, I mean, I wouldn't have done this anyway, but I'm always reminded of that. Like, sometimes when it's just like, oh, I want to explore and take a new route, without the GPS. Not me, Justin. I like to stick to this GPS. I don't want to be caught out. You watch a lot of horror movies as well. But seriously, though, I like the pacing of it. I like that they kind of just throw us into a situation. They go from being at a dance into the middle of nowhere to the woods. And then they think that they found some help with Darla. And Darla's, she's so wacky and out of control. I have to be honest with you. I remember we used to get a lot of characters like her back in the 90s. Like that was a little bit off. We don't really get those too much anymore, like ones like Darla. Like I can't recall. Right. Yeah, even within the last 10 years or so, I cannot think of a character. But like you, I really like her, and I really like Jenny. Like you said, like she's supposed to be weird, and like, oh my gosh, she's just this geeky girl with her glasses. But it's just like, guys, she's still beautiful with her glasses or whatever. But know how it is, how it goes. Then I know we haven't reached him yet, but is Vilmer?
Matthew McConaughey is Vilmer.
There's just so much wrong.
Yeah.
Him and his leg, him and all those remotes, like, why do you need all those remotes? And then too, like, I have to be honest with you, I really love this Leatherface.
Me too.
Like, he is amazing. Like, may he rest in peace, Robert Jacks, who played him. I thought he did a phenomenal job. So, but yeah, I'm sorry, I can keep going, but it's just, this movie just literally brings me joy because, again, I remember watching it with my mom and my sister. And while we were watching, we're just like, well, why would she keep driving? What is that? You know what I mean? It's like all this stuff that was happening, but it was just such a good time, like watching it, like I watched it yesterday and then also watched it this afternoon. It definitely just brought me back to my childhood.
Yeah, I mean, joy is the word, Zena. Like right from the beginning too. Right at the dance, you're right. Heather's voice, where she's just like, Barry, where are you? And then she's like talking to this teacher, and then some weird, strange girls like next to her, like,
what's that?
Just don't even like, no. She's just trying to get a. She does this all the time. She's like so manic, and I'm like, what? But then she just goes outside and she's like, Barry, where are you? And he's making out with right behind, but he's the ultimate gaslighter, Barry, like, Heather, this is your fault, like totally your fault. And it's just like the whole thing is like it's all about Barry. And then you have Jenny, who pops up and is sort of like BS to everything Barry says. But then what's great about it is that you do have these very, very, very cliched characters. You know exactly who they are right away. But then they actually, with the exception of Sean, because he doesn't last too long, the exception, they each sort of get to have a moment where, Heather reveals, she's not so stupid. Like, hey, I act like this to get attention. She's like, I wish I could be like more like Jenny. And Barry's like, no, you don't. She's like, you're probably right. Like, you're right. She's self-aware of herself, like, you're probably right. I don't have that courage. And I don't. And, even Barry's sort of like, well, why do you let me go on so much? And Jenny, obviously, too, we get to see such a character arc with Jenny from who she is at the beginning of the film to who she is by the end. And yes, you're right. We don't get Darla characters anymore. And I do feel like, I can't think of any off the top of my head because I didn't think about it in this context, but you're right. We don't get that many Darla characters anymore. And I think that like they're created for the male gaze, with moments of her flashing and stuff. I never look at it in that context because I just am cracking up at the things she's saying, where she's just like, that old fart over there, he'll shoot you before you say hello or whatever. Just her whole attitude about life is sort of like, no, like, listen, I get that your arm is bleeding and about to fall off, but really, this isn't that big of a deal. Just sort of like that thing. And here's the thing. When I watched stuff like that when I was younger, I always just assumed these were very fictional characters. People like that don't exist. People like that do exist in the world that we
Yes,
live
they
in. It's
do.
not so far-fetched. And but right off the bat, it's joy. Come in as mindless
Hmm.
entertainment. Like you almost are watching a John Hughes teen comedy or
Right.
anything from the 90s, like these sort of aspects, which again makes it, and I'm not saying like Scream is the best movie of all time, but I think most people will agree it was a very influential film. But
Right.
I like to comment that as much as I love Scream, and I do love Scream, it's not the
Hmm.
only influential film at that time, or it's not necessarily the first film to ever try something like that. And I do feel
Right.
like this film, Texas Next Generation, is also trying that, or at least they're not making as big of a deal of it, but they're like effortlessly ingraining that in the
Hmm.
tapestry of the film. But yeah, I do want to then segue to talking about Vilmer and Jenny and the whole Sawyer clan. I think that you're right. Robert Jacks is one of the best Leatherfaces. I like that again, what this film does with his character. It's all the stuff that the previous films sort of played with, like, but he's genuinely scary, creepy. And then it leads to the whole in drag stuff. And I do think that probably like some people are sort of like, whoa, wait, what movie is this? But I love it. I love that they
Me too.
take that and really throw it out there because it's not just what's hinted about in the 97 or 1973 version.
Hmm.
I feel like Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, the Leatherface in that is very heterosexually Leatherface in terms of his desires for stretch. But in 3, we don't really get too much into it. But this one really plays that no, wait, he is trying to be whatever character,
Hmm.
person, whoever he's putting their face on, their mask. And
Right.
if that's a woman, then he's really going to be a woman. I think
Hmm.
that's a really interesting concept and terrifying in the fact that it's literally somebody's face,
Hmm.
which is very much what Ed Gein did, who like inspired all of this. It was, you have the Ed Gein who inspired Psycho and the Ed Gein who inspired Texas Chainsaw.
Hmm.
And, again, it's all brought out in this film. But please, what are some more of your thoughts on that, as well as just the Sawyer clan? Because again, I don't think I'll go more into Vilmer, but I'll just say real
Hmm.
quick, it's very Matthew McConaughey. Like, no, that character has been played in each of the films, but Matthew McConaughey certainly brings a whole new level of crazy to it.
Yes. I love when he says, all right, all right.
Yeah.
He still says that. And when he like grabs her and pulls her face, he's going like
Yeah,
that.
intense. It's
Like
crazy.
it's creepy. It's creepy. Like he is a perfect psycho. Like it's insane. Like I believed him. I believed him as a kid, rewatching it again and just believe it. But yeah, with Leatherface, first, yes, I agree with you. That's exactly how I saw it, where it's just like he becomes the person, whoever face he has. If it's a woman, he's going to be a woman. We saw him there painting his nails, but he was still creepy. I love the scene when he is like behind Heather and he's kind of like grabbing at her head. Well, it's
Yes.
not really
Yes,
grabbing,
yes,
that's
yes, yes.
creepy. And then she
Very.
turns around and she sees him, like it's just like that moment where it's just like, I mean, what else could she do but just scream? He is, I love the way he's built, like he's built, like he's just like a big guy, he's scary. There's no way you'll be able to take him on, like that. So I love seeing that. With Darla, going back to Darla for a little bit, I love the fact that she has like a regular job. She has
Yeah.
a regular job, and yeah, people would just think that, oh, she just probably had too much to drink. Maybe she was drinking too much wine or something. But I remember watching as a kid, and when she kind of like lifted up her top, again, I don't know why my mom let me watch this at a very young age.
My mom too.
Our mothers are awesome.
They were just awesome. Awesome, awesome.
Yeah. So it's just kind of like, I knew that there was something off with her then,
Yes.
because and then of course they're not going to make it too easy. But to me, that's different because how like sometimes it's just like that person, there's clearly something off. I would just think that she just had something, she had too much to drink again. So that's fitting. And I love the fact that her and Vilmer, that they're a couple. Like
Right.
it's insane, but I can see it. I can totally see it. And then even
Right.
when she kind of said something like how she could always go back to her husband, you know,
Right.
you know, I believe that because, you know, at the end of the day, it just seemed like she's just she's just able to cover it up more than Velmer can, you know. So there's that. And then I know there's that other guy. I'm not too sure his name, but he was the one that stopped Barry. He had the shotgun outside.
Right. Shotgun guy, because I can't remember his name
Okay,
either, but
with
shotgun
the
guy.
shotgun guy, with him, even with him, he just fits in with the family. You know, like it's what in that particular scene too. I wanted to talk about like with Barry, how he thought he tricked him and he went into the house, but that's what he wanted and like locked him out. And I would think to myself, first off, don't you think that there's something wrong because their windows are boarded up? But okay. Then when he's in the house and it's just like that's not normal. There's just something off. But I love like the design of the house.
Totally.
I think that they were able to accomplish, in my opinion, because you know that there are people who do not like this movie. I think they were able to accomplish the feel, but modernized it, you know, and made it a little more silly, you know, compared to the original. I just thought, okay, this is the 90s. So they just made it more, you know, 90s, more modern. And it was modern when I, you know, watched it. And so like when he went upstairs and he found his way to the bathroom and there's just like this like dead, decaying, tarnished dead body, then he realized, oh, there's something wrong. Okay, you didn't notice anything, and then guarantee you know that house smells. There's just so much, like, I know it's silly, I know it's over the top, but it's just like I love the fact that it has like such a it has such a great feel to it. I love the Sawyer family. I love how they built up on that. I love like the teenagers. I love Jenny. And I know we're not at the ending, but even the ending where it's just like, what happened to her? You know,
Right.
so it's just one of those situations. And we know that Darla's still fine. So she's somewhere out there. And also just going back to Heather, I kind of wanted to talk about Heather's death scene
Yeah,
because
for sure.
okay, well, yeah, and then I'm sure we'll get to like our favorite parts because I have so many. But her death scene was just kind of brutal, man. Like leading
Yeah.
up to it, she was just tortured. You know, she was yanked and snatched up by Leatherface. She was thrown into like a freezer. She was hung up on a hook, you know, and then it's like she got her lips or tongue like it was getting bit. I don't even know, just so much. And then her back, burning her back, and then ultimately her skull just being crushed. And you know, Velmer's face when he was doing that, it's just kind of like, you are a pure psycho. Like again, the layering of this, I'm just so in love with it. I think it's and then the surprise, the guy who kind of just comes in and Jenny thought that she was going to be saved. I thought that she was going to be saved. You know, what a
Yeah, the
surprise.
Illuminati guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, if you notice,
Wow.
like I've noticed it now every time on the side of Vilmer's truck, it says Illuminati wrecking. And, I just think
Oh.
that's so cool. Like, again, I had no idea what the Illuminati was or anything, but in
Mhm.
general, so cool. But I do want to say, regarding Heather's death or Heather in general, I think that in some ways, because these characters are so cliched, and because and this has a lot to do with Kim Henkel's script, who was also the writer, I believe, in the original. He's also the director of this one. Because these characters are so cliched, and we're kind of, at least you and I found the comedy in it and are laughing. I think in a lot of ways it makes moments like Heather's attack and all that happens with her all the more terrifying. We're
Mhm.
sitting there, again, for me, the first 15 minutes of this movie, I'm kind of cracking up, laughing, maybe a little the first couple of times unsettled laughter because I'm like, I know
Right.
something's going to happen, but I am genuinely laughing and it relaxes me to the point that, yes, it's super creepy when Leatherface is playing with her hair, but once he like grabs her, and he's brutal in his attack,
Yeah.
and you generally are like, it makes it all the more scary, in my opinion. And I think what they do with her is just horrifying. Definitely not the worst we've seen in movies, but because we've kind of grown to love her, she is
Right.
it's all the more affecting. But yes, I do think that Darla represents, the cook from the original. Each of them sort of have their own
Right.
things. Darla and Shotgun Brother, who's always quoting all these like infamous quotes,
Mhm.
Thomas Paine, George Washington, whoever he's quoting. I feel like they are, they were split. The cook was split into Darla and Shotgun Guy. And Darla, yes, I love that she's a couple or in a relationship with Vilmer, but also married. And that also goes to the like the root of her demented being of why she should be with him, where she is just sort of like blasé saying, if I really want, I can just always go back to my husband. And that's what makes it so perfect that she's in a relationship with Vilmer because he's so crazy. So, of course, she's
Yeah.
approaching this from such a crazy outlook. And I just think it's interesting that, again, it has those sort of elements of Texas Chainsaw, the original, as well as the sequels, because it is meant to be,
Right.
even though it's called Next Generation, it was always intended to be the fourth movie. It's not trying to start a new thing, it's just continuing on the whole idea. And I will say again, just yeah, the house, like you said, is super creepy. I feel like it really does have a great suspenseful feel. And I'll segue a little bit into saying, we could talk about some of our favorite scenes, but for me, hands down, I think it's one of the best chase sequences in the Texas Chainsaw franchise.
Yes.
Once Jenny gets in the car with Vilmer, who has again that sense of humor here. He's basically like, you can't get in the car with strangers. She's like, I know. And he's like, yeah, there was this guy, he ripped off this girl's arms, and she's like, oh, terrible. And he's like, I know, he could be so much better. What a
Oh
simpleton. And
my
she's like,
God.
stop, you're scaring me. And from then on out, it is, her jumping out of cars, her hiding in those trees, running from Leatherface, running through the house. But, again, because maybe this kind of goes hand in hand with what you were saying about the 90s, where they sort of contemporized it a little bit. They really, in the original, she runs up the stairs, Sally, finds the room, comes down, jumps out a window. Well, Renee Zellweger as Jenny does that, but she also scales the roof, climbs an antenna, jumps across to a wire, falls through a greenhouse, and she's still going strong. And I think, but I love that. I think we all come to horror for different reasons or things we love about it. And for me, I just always love a good chase sequence. That's the icing on the cake for me or whatever. And I just think it's brilliant. Like the whole time it's elongated and extended that he's always just about to get her and she manages to keep getting out. It's a bit unrealistic. She's quite a gymnast, our Jenny, but overall, I think that it's like it's so great. But again, for me, the suspense of that, it all is culminated from the silliness of the beginning, and the
Right.
silliness that's to come is all culminated in that huge chase sequence. But what are any comments about that previously, or what are some of your favorite moments, etc., from the film?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. Okay, so the first one that immediately comes to mind when Heather is on the floor, like somewhere on the road, and Darla is
Yes,
driving,
yes, yes.
and Darla, comes out and sees on the floor, and Heather's like, "Please, can you help me?" And so then Darla's trying to find a stick, and the way she's hitting her,
It's
I
just
just
this light
remember,
little, she's like,
yes,
uh, like no effort whatsoever. Like,
yes,
oh, I gotta do this, I guess.
right. And it's just kind of like they could have just left that out, like,
Oh, see,
and I
I
was
love it though. I love it.
I love it too. I love it too. But it's like, come on, guys, you're watching this, so it's just like we need to do it over. Maybe give her a light stick that way, or you know what I mean, some type of prop that's not going to hurt her. But yeah, I was just thought that was funny, even as a kid. And
For
I remember I
sure.
was just like really in the zone. But I just remember hearing my sister like, oh, she was like, oh, come on, when she
See,
saw
that's
like,
funny. I always interpreted that scene as like part of Darla's character. Like, oh yeah, I'm kind of hanging out with this guy, and this is what his family does. So, okay, you know what? This just isn't gonna
right.
work. Just stay there. Like, I thought that I always just interpreted that as part of Darla's character, but I get what you're saying too, because I love moments like that too, when it's so obviously fake. So I like that you can kind of
Yes.
watch it both ways. But I'm sorry,
And it's
continue.
and it's like I still love it. I still
Yeah.
love it. I didn't think of it that way. Maybe it was, but then she was just like, Heather, ow, ow, and then she said
Right.
something, and then and then Darla was like, well, all right, and then she gets in the car and she leaves. But obviously she tells him. So there's that part, and then the other part that I thought was funny. And I have one more after this, and I promise that's it. The other
Please
part
give
that I
them
thought
all.
okay, so then the other part I thought was funny was when Leatherface was at the table and all this stuff was happening, all this stuff is happening, and Jenny was fed up. She's been through it at that point, and she says, all right, I am leaving and no one's gonna stop me. So then okay.
Hey, I'm not weird, everybody. That's what happens.
That's what happened. You did it perfectly. He starts screaming, and I don't remember. She pretty much told him to shut up, and then he just sits down.
You sit right down. She's like, you sit the F down.
Yeah, like, but it's
I love
funny.
it. That's one of my favorites too.
Right, and it just fits. And then just the last one, and I feel like such a jerk. So the older couple, Mr. Spottish and Mrs. Spottish, or Spot, whatever, in their RV. It's just like, they had their margaritas. I don't know what kind of drink that was, some type of cocktail drink. They were living it up until they were trying to save Jenny,
right.
And she like ruined their lives. They're probably dead, and ruined their whole trip. And it's just kind of like, they were just having so much fun. And it's so weird because, first off, why are you taking a road trip over there? What's down there, Right. But yeah, I'm sorry. So what are some of your favorite scenes?
Again, the chase sequence, I just love in terms of the horror fan in me, but all the moments you described. I mean, like when she's like flirting, she's in the drive-through, Jenny's in the trunk, and she's just kind of flirting with the guy. She's like, he's like, what's in your trunk? She's like, you don't want to know, or something, just Darla. But again, seriously, any moment that involves Heather and Darla, I'm sold. I love it. The whole, it's hard to describe because I think the whole film is exquisite. I think it's amazing. Yeah. And I think like just the culmination of Jenny finally getting her strength when she does stand up to Vilmer and Leatherface, and the sort of craziness of Matthew McConaughey again. It's like an experience, you're sort of like, you don't know what to do because if you're a fan of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you've seen these moments before, but they're being done differently, and not different for the sake of different. It's almost like organically like occurring. And I think it's just so fascinating. But I guess we could start to, segue into the end. What did you think? For me personally, leading to the older couple, when Jenny finally, she thinks she's been saved by this Illuminati guy who's definitely not. That's one of the cringiest moments for me. I don't know why, but when he lifts his shirt and it's all done. And I'm always like, ugh. But when she finally, there's one moment where she does try to escape, and it's very Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but Vilmer jumps on the car, she crashes, but then she gets away again, and it's right about to be her moment because he catches her, and she grabs the remote, which is so, out of place, bizarre, but fitting to this version. And she's like, they're like having the remote battle off. She's running. She definitely ruins Mr. and Mrs. Spot's vacation. Like, isn't it a beautiful day, Mr. Spot? It sure is, Mrs. And she's like, don't pick her up. But then she just like hauls Jenny into the RV. Yeah. Like she's running and she's like, boom. And everything that's happened up to this moment, you're just stunned. So anything is possible. You ultimately then lead to the whole camper flips. But, what happens to Vilmer, the traditional Leatherface ending. But I also love that we have Marilyn Burns at the end, who is Sally kind of rolled by, and they, the two women have a connection. And like you said earlier, I would love to know what had happened to Jenny, just as much as I would love to know what happened to Sally. The new Texas Chainsaw Massacre definitely gave us a version of Sally, and I loved it for what it was. I feel like that role could have gone a lot of different ways. And I'm glad we got to see that version, but there's 1,000 versions of Sally that I wish we could see, just like Stretch. Like I said, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, I honestly think, the second one may have now become my favorite of all of them, but it really is, for me, the three biggies are the original, 2, and this one. I remember seeing the next gen, or the remakes in the theater, and I love them, but and we can kind of talk about the franchise as a whole afterwards. But I do also want to know what happened to Stretch. She has a cameo in part 3. Who, by the way, Caroline Williams, her and I sometimes tweet on Twitter, and I just want to give a shout out to her because I think she's amazing. Aww. And my mom watched Texas Chainsaw 2 and loved her in it. But I think ultimately the way this one ends is so fitting for the rest of the movie that we saw, with this sort of plane coming down, propeller, Jenny, you know, being whisked away by the Illuminati guy, and he offers her, you know, sanctuary one way or another after she's like pulled him off. And I think we have a full character arc with Jenny, that she's never going to be the sort of waif or shy introverted girl again. She's now going to call BS. I've never seen it, but I guess in the extended cut, you know, they mentioned this in the movie. Her mother has boyfriends that are always hitting on Jenny, always making her, you know, feel super uncomfortable. And I think from here on out, she'll never stand for that again. And
Right.
I'm just glad for her character, not that she went through this experience, but if nothing else, she found something positive out of it, and that's her own voice and strength.
Right.
But please tell me, from the finale climax through the ending, what did you think overall?
I love the ending. You know, it's like they kind of left that door open, you know, and then even with when Jenny and it's not Sally, but when those two women connect, you know, at the end, it's just kind of like, whoa, you know, like it's like they're kind of connected, you know what I mean? And I just love that if you know, you know, if you don't, you don't, you know what I mean? So it's just kind of like with that. And I didn't remember the ending, you know, like as a kid, you know, like I said, I remember watching the original one first at an extremely young age. And then I was late to watching the sequel, part 2. You know, I watched it, I think when I was like a teenager, maybe, but I remember like skipping like 3 and I went to 4, you know, I know technically it's not 4, but you know, I went to that one. So, but yeah, I love the ending. I love the fact that, you know, Jenny thinks that she's saved, which is so wild because you can't trust anyone, you know, you can't trust anyone, but it's just like, I mean, what else could she have done? She would have just been walking at the side of the road, and who knows if Darla would have came back or something, you know. So I really did enjoy like the ending. And even again, like when it comes to this movie with the director, Ken Henkel, you know, I think that he did a great job. He's always been a part of the franchise, even if he was just like a writer, he was always like, you know, in some ways a part of the franchise, and they gave him his time to shine. And it's unfortunate because I really don't feel like this movie is bad. It's not bad, but it's just like it doesn't take itself seriously. And I feel like and I think too, like when we spoke the last time, we kind of talked about the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre and how a lot of people didn't like that one. And this is not being, because I usually hate when people say no shade, because then they actually throw that shade. But no, you know what? No shade. But my thing is, what did you expect with a movie that's called Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Like that's what I'm confused at. And then on top of that, it's one thing if you don't like the movie, that's fine, you know, let's talk about it. But it's like people were angry about it and saying how, well, I just felt like it was trying to be like Halloween. I can see how people could see that, but I didn't think that. To me, I don't think that it was trying to be that. It wasn't, the focus was not on Sally at all. So, you know what I mean? At all.
Yeah,
and I kind of just, yeah, and I like, again, I'm not trying to like bash anyone. If you didn't like it, it's fine. I feel like I've met so many people and we had conversations where they don't like it, but it's just like, okay, this is a slasher movie. They gave us blood, they gave us gore, they literally gave us a massacre like scene. Like, what are you talking about? So it's just kind of like, and then again, it just makes me think, okay, I guess you guys didn't watch some of the movies a part of the franchise, because I just don't understand what you were expecting. And I think that goes back to kind of what you said when you mentioned Halloween. I don't feel those two are completely different, you know, and I feel like not a lot of people, not that they don't get that, maybe they forget or something, maybe they did want more of a serious tone, but the franchise proved it. Like it's not that at all.
It really isn't. I couldn't agree with more with everything that you're saying. Just I'll jump in real quick just to say, yeah, I think that each of them had their own reaction to the time that they were in. Like we just said, this one had a 90s feel to it, and it was made in the 90s. The original had a 70s feel, 80s feel for the second one. I just feel like this one was definitely made more modernized, but I definitely felt it still belonged to Texas Chainsaw. And you know, the ultimate factor of, you know, the ultimate fate of the one sister at the end is very much a Texas Chainsaw ending. My only complaint with the new one was that I missed the family. You know, like I like Leatherface on his own too. I think he's terrifying every time he pops out, chases somebody with the chainsaw, all that. Love it. But I always like that his voice is from his crazy family,
Mm-hmm.
and that literally would have been the only thing that I really would have complained about with the newest one, was I wish the rest of the family had been
Right.
involved. But otherwise, yeah, no, I didn't. Maybe a little with the Sally character, I guess, as the Lori, but I
Mm-hmm.
also didn't really feel. I felt they gave her own, I Sally-ish,
Right.
Sally-ness, or she was very Texan, at
Mm-hmm.
least from a stereotypical standpoint, where Lori is not that,
Right.
so I personally thought it fit well with the series as a whole.
Mm-hmm. And on top of that too, because you just sparked this for me. What I like about it with Sally, like, okay, it's kind of, I'm at a split. I'm not gonna lie, I wanted to see more Sally, but at the same time, I had no idea that she was even going to be in the movie,
Right,
because
nor did
I
I.
remember I did watch the trailer. I don't recall, so it's just kind of like, okay, fine. So then it's just like, I kind of like the fact that, you know, we get her and she's bridging pretty much, the past, in the future, you know what I mean? Like, or the present, like she's able to like put those together. Like, I'm not saying that I think the movie is perfect, because I don't, but if we're just saying that it's a slasher, it's a horror, once again, kind of like what we said earlier, I'm not too sure what people were expecting to me. So again, but this is not, again, putting anyone down. Like, if you hated it, there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm just saying, like, there was a lot of stuff that you know, I really enjoyed about it. There's some stuff that's just like, And oh, one last thing too. I remember there were a lot of people who were upset with which I don't remember her name off the top of my head, but with the other sister, when they kind of mentioned the thing that she's kind of like a survivor from like with
Full
from
shooting.
gun. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I remember someone was just saying how, well, that to me doesn't make any sense, because what did they say? Pretty much that, why would she want to touch a gun? And it's just like, okay, I'm just saying, I have met some people who went through some traumatic things, and they tend to be drawn to the thing. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I
they
don't think
tend
there's
to,
any one way to express. Like, I
right.
think that was kind of the point of that character, was that
Mhm.
there's not one way to be.
Right.
All of a sudden, everybody expected her to do great things or be this, but
Right.
like, you can't. Not everybody reacts to trauma the same
No,
way, and I feel like it's
no.
almost damaging to suggest that.
It is. It is. And of course she's going to want to be on her own. Of course she's going to be curious about guns. Like, to me, because I've met people who've gone through traumatic stuff, it doesn't seem far-fetched at all. And kind of like what you said, you can't really measure that. You don't really know how people are going to react to something like that, but it doesn't mean, other than, and I know people are going crazy about that over Twitter, and it's just kind of like, I don't get it. Like,
Right.
just because you would act one way, it doesn't mean that, so I don't know. Again, I like the setup of that one. I like how they kind of just throw us into it.
Right. It's interesting. I think it has a lot of interesting moments where now that one for me, it's not my favorite one now by any means, but I thought it was just fine. But in terms of Next Generation, what are your favorite Texas Chainsaw Massacres, and where does Next Generation kind of fit for you? Like I said, for me, the top three are one, two, and this one. I
Mhm.
feel like part three is kind of terrible, but only because of how it's put together. I think it has a lot of really interesting moments into it,
Right.
but I just feel like it's kind of edited together in a way. Because I think the first half of that movie is great. There's a lot of interesting stuff in the second, third act, but the
Hmm.
conclusion sort of doesn't make sense. And then again, I love, love, love this one. I remember seeing the remake in the theater, and the first one, and just thought it was fantastic from
Hmm.
a Michael Bay perspective, a straight horror movie thriller, not necessarily the craziness.
Hmm.
I also enjoyed the follow up to that, which was sort of a prequel, I guess. Also
Right.
interesting. And then I remember Texas Chainsaw 3D. I saw that was one too where I'm like, oh, this is going to be silly. But I went into it with the right frame of mind and I actually really enjoyed it. The only one I've not seen is Leatherface, the one that's called
Same.
Leatherface. And then again, the most recent one, I did not think it was nearly as bad as I was expecting it to be because of what I've
Same.
heard. But it's not my favorite by any means, but I thought it
Mhm.
was just fine. I think it belonged to the Texas Chainsaw franchise. But what about you? What are your thoughts on the franchise overall? Where does Next Generation kind of fit?
So I actually love the franchise. I
Yeah.
think that it's great. I think Leatherface needs more shine. I would love to see more Leatherface. But okay, the first one is definitely like, that one's my favorite one. And at first I was gonna say, yeah, I really do like part two. I do like part two, but I'm gonna say that for me, it's the first one, then it's the one from 2003, Jessica Biel,
Yeah,
that
the
one.
remake, yeah,
Because
for sure.
yeah, that one is gritty. It just look,
Yeah,
it's dirty, it's mean. Like one of the scenes that completely stand out to me, and this has nothing really to do with Leatherface. It's when they're pretty much stranded and they're trying to get their van fixed, and then this person kind of blow their brains out, I'm sorry,
right.
right, and then they have to clean it up, but they don't have any water, so they have to use spit, and it's hot. It's like I can smell it through this, like through the screen, and
Yeah,
it's like, can you imagine having to sit in there just
no,
until you get to some type of,
no,
that's what I'm saying, it's already a terrible situation. I would have just walked at this point,
yes. No,
let's
it's
just
gross,
walk.
yeah. But it is a great one. I do love the film too. It's so gritty and
It is.
scary. I think it's genuinely scary the first time you watch it.
Same. So yeah, it's again, so it's the 1974 one, the 2003 one, and then honestly, I like this one. It's this
Oh
one,
yeah,
The Next Generation. I think it's fun.
yeah.
It's fun. They try to modernize it, but now it's always been wacky, but now it's just one of those 90s wacky movies.
Yeah.
And whenever I want to have like a smile on my face, I can just put that movie on.
I agree. I think it's all of them too in general. It's just about what kind of mood I'm in. I will always
Mhm.
love the original. I think it's terrifying. For me, always one of the scariest horror moments of all time is the first time when Leatherface hits the guy in the head and that door shuts and it's just the silence. And
Yes.
that for me is one of the, it's still, the chill goes through me. But
Mhm.
the second one I really do think is my favorite. It's I never thought it would be, but it really has become my favorite. Judge all you want out there, but it is. And then I do think that this one and the remake are tied for the third spot for me. Like,
It's,
I just love
that,
them for different
yeah.
reasons, but love them.
And you know what? I'm gonna say, with the recent one, if I had to like order them, I do think they would probably be in my top six,
Yeah,
because it's fun. And kind of we talked about, people watch horror for different reasons. When it comes to slashers and when it comes to this franchise, I watch it because I want to be entertained and I want to have fun. And this movie does that.
absolutely. Any final thoughts or anything else you wanted to discuss?
Just, I think that everybody should just rewatch this movie, even if it's been a couple of years, because it's been a couple of years for me. I think the last time I honestly watched it was maybe like in 2017. So it's been, because I remember it was like for a watch party and I checked it out. And but yeah, for a friend who sadly passed away, he really liked the movie, and we had like a watch party for him.
Oh,
And
sorry to hear
it was
that.
just, yeah, he was so awesome. But this movie gave me all the feels just watching it. It's just great. It's a great movie.
Yeah, I think this is for the horror fan that just wants to be entertained. Like we said at the
Mhm.
beginning, it's gonna make you laugh at times. It. I don't think it overall fits into, but it does have moments that fit into that so bad it's good category.
Yes.
I think that it has some really genuine thrill moments, some WTF moments, and some,
Yes.
you know, craziness, but that's all part of what you do when you sit down to watch a Texas Chainsaw movie. I feel like Next Generation is the perfect placement of kind of as in the middle of the franchise as a whole, when it came out, how it came out, because it really does encapsulate the spirit of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining us for another episode of the Rabid Dog House. Which one are your favorite Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies? Are you a fan of Next Generation? What did you think of the most recent installment? But which one is your favorite? Please comment below. Thank you, Zena Dixon, the Real Queen of Horror, for joining us tonight. As always, you can find Zena over at realqueenofhorror.com, on YouTube under her Real Queen of Horror moniker, or over at Wicked Horror. And I'm Justin Steele. You can find me over at Wicked Horror, 411 Pop Culture, or on Twitter at Wicked Horror Justin. Thank you, Zena, for talking with me about Texas Chainsaw Massacre Next Generation and Texas Chainsaw overall. I had a blast talking with you.
Thank you. I had so much fun, as always.
As always, always. And thanks everybody for watching. Have a good one.